Bike touring is my favorite way to travel. I like it for the freedom, the exercise, the time it gives me to untangle my brain, all that stuff. But there are some things about bike touring that are tough. It's not all sunshine and tailwinds. There's a dark side to bike touring. The stuff nobody wants to talk about. The stuff you don't read about in the travel brochure. I'm not trying to discourage anybody from bike touring. I'm just trying to keep it real. I think it's important that you know what you're getting yourself into. So today, I want to talk about the 4 banes of bike touring: wind, hills, dogs, and traffic. So get the kids out of the room. Today we're going to talk about the dark side of bike touring. You're out there bike touring and you run into anything like this, don't say I didn't warn you. Bike touring's challenging, but that's what we do. We overcome challenges. But if bike touring was easy, then everybody would do it. I guess the alternative is you can just stay home, stay on your couch where it's safe. First, let's talk about the wind. Hey, it's just moving air, right? A light breeze on a hot summer day feels good, but a 25-mile-an-hour headwind straight at you, can really knock you back. Tough headwinds can not only wear you down physically, can wear you down mentally, because the wind never gets tired. If you're battling headwinds for days on end, you can start to question your own sanity. Tough headwind can be the bane of any bike tour, but don't let it get you. So how do you deal with these strong headwinds? I don't race into the wind. It's a losing battle. When I'm facing a strong headwind, I think the best option is just to gear down, put it in a lower gear, and just slow down. You're going to cover the same distance, but it's going to take you just a little bit longer. So you might as well just slow down, lower your expectation a little bit, and don't burn out your legs. You'll get there, just a little bit later, that's all. And when it comes to moving air, the only thing worse than a strong headwind is a strong crosswind. A strong crosswind from the right feels like it's pushing you into traffic. If you got a strong crosswind from the left and there's a truck coming up from behind you, the blast from the truck will push you along. On the other hand, the wind blast from an oncoming truck will knock you back. Not to mention the sand blasting you're going to get. I'd rather have a strong headwind than a strong crosswind any day. A headwind will slow you down, but a crosswind messes with your bike, especially if you've got panniers. I can't even imagine what it'll feel like with a frame bag. That frame bag's going to feel like a sail. Unless, of course, you just see headwind as an opportunity. The wind's not always the enemy. If you consider the 8 cardinal directions on a compass, there's a 3 out of 8 chance that the wind can actually be helpful. In other words, you can expect a tailwind about 37% of the time. And if you consider no wind a plus, your odds are even better. And I think if you bike tour long enough, the wind kind of evens out after a while. Just as often as I've had to battle headwind, I've also had the benefit of a nice tailwind. Nothing makes the miles melt away faster than cruising down a nice flat stretch of road with a 20-mile-an-hour wind behind you. Here in the US, they talk about something called the prevailing westerlies, like the wind is always out of the west. So if you're going to ride your bike across the country, you should start on the west coast and ride toward the east. Well, that's not always true. The wind's not always out of the west. Sure, the prevailing westerlies is true up in the jet stream, but that's about 30,000 feet above sea level in the stratosphere. Surface winds don't always match the jet stream at 30,000 feet. I've rode across Kansas a couple times, and trust me, the wind is not always out of the west. Don't bank on it, but I would say in general, in the US in the summertime, the wind is usually out of the west, or the south, or the southwest. In other words, there's really nothing you can do about the wind, so just deal with it. And if the wind's really hammering at you, you might consider taking a rest day. Weather systems move around, and usually in a few days, the weather will change along with the wind, and they can resume your ride with fresh legs. I've thought about taking a follow the wind tour, you know what I mean? Every morning get up, kind of stick my finger up in the air, see which way the wind's blowing, and then ride that way. The only problem is, after a few days, you probably just end up right back where you started. Alright, another topic about bike touring that they usually don't mention in the brochure, and that is hills. Now you know the earth is round, right? It's not flat. But there are lots of hills. In a car or on a motorcycle, you really don't notice the hills, because you just give it more gas. But when you're on a bicycle, and the road goes even up a little bit of a slope, you give it more gas, that's your legs talking now. So which would you rather battle? Tough hills or tough wind? Personally, I'd rather take the hills. At least with the hills, there's a reward at the top. For every uphill, there's a downhill. With the wind, usually there's no reward. It's just wind. The wind can blow all day, and if you listen really hard, sometimes you can hear the wind laughing at you. The worst is when you're climbing up a tough uphill with a strong headwind. But sometimes I've found that the big hill in front of you can actually block the wind. At least that's what it seems like to me. Maybe it's all mental. I don't know. But when you're climbing a tough hill, just keep this in mind. It can't go up forever, unless you're climbing to the moon. And eventually, you'll reach the top. And even though my legs hurt now, when I get to the top of the hill, it's going to feel so good. And the more hills I climb, the stronger my legs are going to be in the end. You know, when I was 23, the challenge was to get to the top of the hill without stopping. Nowadays, I'm just glad to get to the top of the hill. And some of these really long, steep hills, I'll be honest with you, sometimes I've had to get off my bike and push. In the western U.S., in the Sierras, in the Cascades, and the Rocky Mountains, the elevations can get way above 8,000 feet. And I'm not used to that. I'm from Illinois, about 500 feet above sea level. And when I get up about 8,000 feet, I can really feel it. I'm sure that people who live out west in the mountains are more acclimatized to the elevation than I am. Do you know what elevation sickness feels like? Yeah, you get a pounding headache, you feel nauseous, your legs get weak, and you just want to sit down. That's your body's check engine light going off. And sometimes you don't get a second warning. The brain is saying, hey, the oxygen levels are getting kind of low, and you better take a break before you pass out. It's best to go easy, take your time, and get to the top of the pass. Some mountain passes out west can be as long as 20 miles or more, with a grade 5 or 6%. In the Appalachians, in the Ozarks, in the eastern U.S., the elevations aren't as high, but the roads can be steeper. I think the highest point in the Appalachians is just over 6,000 feet, and most roads don't go that high. Expect shorter climbs, maybe 3 or 4 miles up at the most, but grades can be 8% and some sections up to 12%. That's pretty steep. Makes my legs hurt and my heart and lungs pound out of my chest. It makes me want to get off and walk my bike before it starts rolling backwards. You know what they mean by percent grade when they say like 6%? Do you know what that means? It's pretty simple. Remember rise over run? I don't know, high school geometry. But anyways, it's like a comparison of how much elevation you gain over the distance traveled. Rise over run. So let's say I gained 1 foot of elevation, but I've traveled 20 feet forward. That's 1 foot over 20, that's a 5% grade. Let's say I gained 2 feet of elevation over 20 feet of distance. Well, that's 2 over 20, that's a 10% grade. So you reach the top. Oh, what a feeling. And you see that sign that every biker looks for. You know, that downhill sign with the truck on the downhill thing going like that. Yeah, that's the sign every biker loves. And you think your troubles are over. Usually I like to stop, catch my breath, enjoy the view, maybe take a couple pictures, and get ready for the high-speed thrill ride of the downhill. I'm not trying to scare anybody, but there's so many things that could go wrong on the downhill. Where do I start? Well, so the fastest I ever got going on my bicycle, I was coming out of the east side of Yosemite Park off of Tioga Pass, and I got up to about 56 miles an hour. And yes, I was wearing my helmet. A fully loaded touring bike coming down a hill at that speed doesn't exactly stop on a dime, you know? It's like, what if I hit a bump? What if I hit a rock? You know, what if a pannier comes flying off my bike? And that's actually what happened. I hit a little bump, and one of my front panniers popped right off my bike. Yeah, I had to hit the brakes, didn't exactly stop right away, and I had to go back uphill and fetch my pannier. Another time I was coming down this big hill, and a squirrel ran out in front of me. And you know how they kind of juke back and forth like you're not sure where they're going to go? Well, unfortunately, I ran over the squirrel. I felt pretty bad about it, but I also felt pretty good because I didn't lose control of my bike and wipe out and crash. Another time, I got to the top of Carson Pass in the Sierras, and that's when I noticed that my front brake pads were completely worn out. The brake pads were actually starting to cut a groove in my rim, so I didn't want to use them. So I had to come down the pass with only my rear brakes, no front brakes. You know, I learned that I don't have to hurl my two-wheeled self down a mountain as fast as I can at skull-crushing speeds. There are other options, you know. Maybe pump your brakes a little bit before you get to those terminal speeds. You know what a terminal speed is? Yeah. That's a speed that you reach that could end your life. Yeah, that's terminal speed. What if there's a curve at the bottom of the hill? What if there's gravel on the curve at the bottom of the hill? What if the roads are wet? What if your brakes are wet? These are all things you got to think about when you're coming down a big steep hill. But always enjoy the downhills. You know, it's one of the perks of bike touring. You earned it. Just be safe and don't let yourself wipe out and end up looking like road pizza. Alright, so wind is tough, hills are tough, but you can overcome that stuff, you know, and it's just going to make you stronger, so don't worry about it. Whenever there's a tough headwind, pretty soon there's going to be a nice tailwind. For every uphill, there's going to be a downhill. Another thing about bike touring that they usually don't put in the brochure are dogs. Do you like dogs? I do. I'm a dog lover, so usually dogs don't bother me, but not all dogs are friendly dogs. I like well-behaved dogs. You know, dogs that sit and stay and listen to their owners. Yeah, those are my favorite dogs. And nobody on a bike likes a bad dog. You know, a dog that doesn't listen to its owner and chases you down the road like a wolf chases a deer. To the dog, I think it's just a game. Or maybe it's just instinct. They chase whatever runs. And you're on a bike and you're running, so they chase you. I'm not sure what's going through the dog's mind. But to the biker, sometimes this could be scary, because you don't know what the intentions of that dog are. But I think, more often than not, that dog doesn't really want to eat you. I don't think that dog really even wants to bite you. I think the dog's just having a good time and doesn't realize the emotional trauma it's causing the biker. Sometimes dogs are just like stupid teenagers, that's all. They're just out having fun and they don't realize the trouble they're causing. One dog can be scary enough, but what if you're chased by 2 or 3 dogs at a time, or like a pack of dogs? Every long-distance bike tourist I've ever talked to has their dog stories. I've got a few dog stories of my own. You know, I said before I'm a dog lover, and when I hear a dog barking or I hear a dog chasing me, the first thing I think of is the safety of the dog. Really. One time a dog came out to chase me and he got hit by a car. It was not a pretty sight. I didn't feel good for the rest of the day. I've been bitten by dogs before, but never while bike touring. I've talked to some bike tourists that said they've been bitten, and I've heard stories about bike tourists being bitten. So I know it can happen. One time I had a chasing dog get hold of my rear pannier. So how do you deal with dogs? You can try to outrun the dog, and if you're on a downhill, usually that's not hard. The dog will chase about 20 or 30 yards, then give up because he knows he can't catch you. And since you're out of his territory already, he gives up pretty quick. That's usually what happens. But what if you're riding on an uphill, or the dogs are up ahead of you and they see you coming, and you've got to run a gauntlet of snapping canine jaws? That's about the time you want to hear the voice of the dog's owner yelling at the dog, calling it home. But when it comes to dogs, you've got a few options. If fleeing doesn't work, I think your other best option is to just stop. You know, the dog's instinct is to chase, and if you don't run, it kind of takes away its instinct, and really, the dog doesn't know what to do. If the owner's close by, they'll be calling the dog, and your dog encounter won't last very long. Now, if you decide to stop and get off the bike, I recommend face the dog and try to keep your bike between you and the dog. Again, usually the dog loses interest pretty quick and leaves you alone. I know some people who carry sprays. Pepper spray is very effective. You see, a dog's nose is about 200 times more sensitive than a human. And if they get a whiff of that pepper spray, I guarantee that'll deter them. What I found works just as good as anything is a good squirt of water to the nose. If you get off your bike and that dog won't leave you alone, just squirt it with water right in the nose, and usually they'll leave you alone. But usually the dog's not trying to eat you. He's just trying to check you out, see that you're not a danger, and then he's going to go home again, leave you alone. If worse comes to worse, squirt it with some water or just shout at it, "Go home!" And usually the dog goes home. Usually what I do, and seems to work pretty well for me, is I just ignore the dog. I just keep riding, and if the dog wants to run alongside, I let him. I talk to him like he's my buddy in a friendly tone, and I don't have too much trouble with dogs. If the dog sees that you're not a threat and you're moving out of its territory anyway, it'll probably just leave you alone. If the dog's persistent and keeps following, a squirt of water to the nose usually stops him. Alright, the fourth bane of bike touring, traffic. There's another thing they don't usually mention in the travel brochure. Cars and trucks and other motorized vehicles sharing the road with you. You know, you like to think of bike touring as being always on rural roads with very few cars and birds chirping all the time and sunshine and rainbows and everything like that. But sometimes you've got to share roads with motorized vehicles. Unless you live in a land of no cars and only ride strictly on bike paths, you're going to encounter motorized traffic. So choose your roads wisely. Traffic can be anything from annoying to dangerous or even deadly. For me, when it comes to bike touring, dealing with traffic is probably my least favorite thing. I grew up in a pretty populated area, and me and my friends would ride our bikes on heavily trafficked roads with little or no fear. So for the most part, I've got a pretty high tolerance for traffic. I don't like it, but I'm not afraid of it. I've got a good, healthy respect for motorized vehicles. And I can understand the anxiety that some bikers feel when a big old semi-tractor truck flies by about 5 feet away at 60 miles an hour. And I've had my share of close calls. So, how do you deal with traffic? So I've got 3 tips for dealing with traffic. 1, be visible. 2, be able to see everything around you. And 3, stay as far to the right as you possibly can, or to the left in Europe and everywhere else. But in the US, we ride on the right. Alright, number 1, be visible. Either wear bright colored clothing or have bright colors on your bike. My panniers are bright red, and I have a reflective safety triangle on the back and blinking red lights when necessary, all designed to make myself as visible as possible so that oncoming cars see me, assuming that if they see me, they'll avoid me. Now, if they see me and they don't avoid me and they run me over on purpose, well, I guess that's murder. But assuming that a person gets up in the morning and doesn't want to murder a bicyclist, if they see you, hopefully they'll avoid you. 2, be aware of everything that's going on around you. Pay attention to your surroundings. Use all your senses. I have a mirror on my bike so I can see what's coming up from behind me. I'm listening for cars and trucks coming up from behind me. I'm even listening for oncoming cars in the other lane. 3, stay as far to the right as you can. If there's a shoulder, ride on the shoulder. If it's safe, stay to the right of the white line. I know in most states, bicyclists are allowed the entire lane. And even though you have a right to the full lane, sometimes motorists don't know that, and they get really aggravated by a bicyclist that's taken up the whole lane of traffic, when really if they stay as far to the right, or even on the shoulder, it would be more courteous. I love a road with a big beefy shoulder. Even if it's a 4-lane divided highway, but there's a 6-foot wide shoulder, I like it. Even though some 4-lane divided highways aren't very scenic, I do feel safe. Backcountry roads have a lot less traffic, but oftentimes they don't have shoulders on. I think the safest roads are level roads with good sight lines. Not too many hills, not too many curves, and cars can see a long distance. When I was riding through the Missouri Ozarks, those back roads are real hilly and real windy with almost no shoulders. The sight lines are horrible and cars can't see you from far distances. So you just got to listen carefully and stay as far over as you can. In any case, when I hear a car coming from either direction, I always check my mirror and start getting over to the right. If a vehicle's coming up from behind me, I make sure he's either moving over to give me some space or he's slowing down. And if not, I've been known to put the bike off the road. There's a traffic phenomenon I call the scissors. This is when there's an oncoming car and a car coming up from behind you, and all 3 of you meet at the exact same time. On 2-lane roads with narrow shoulders, there's not a lot of room for error. So if I see an oncoming car and a vehicle coming up from behind that's not slowing down and it looks like there's going to be a scissors, I'd rather just steer my bike off the road into the grass and let the cars have the road. You may have a right to that lane, but it's not worth it to be dead right. Most drivers are very courteous, they slow down, and they give you plenty of space. There are some discourteous drivers that don't slow down and don't give you very much space at all. I guess they figure if you're on a bike, that's your tough luck. Yeah, I got a word for these people, but my wife won't let me use it, and she's probably going to watch this video later. And there are even some motorists that feel that bicycles have no right to the road at all. They believe in freedom, but only for themselves. And slowing down and allowing space for another freedom-loving person is just too great a price to bear. You know, if traffic just freaks you out, don't sell your touring bike right away. There's lots and lots of rail trails. The rail trail system in the United States is growing bigger and bigger every year. You can ride in the US for hundreds of miles, traffic-free. No cars, no trucks, no hills. Tree line cuts the wind down. Seems like ideal riding conditions. So if traffic is just a deal breaker for you, there's plenty of places you can ride where there is no traffic. Well, I hope I didn't scare you. Bike touring is a great way to travel. And as long as you're aware of the challenges, you can get over the rough spots. And I just don't want anybody going out there thinking that it's going to be sunshine and butterflies every day, and the wind's never going to blow in your face, and you're never going to have to ride up a hill, and you're never going to get chased by a dog, or, you know, a car's never going to go past you at a high rate of speed. So going on a bike tour, you're going to have to overcome some challenges. But again, as bike tourists, that's what we do. The way I figure it, if you can ride your bicycle across the country, you can do just about anything. Thanks for watching. Now go ride your bike.